Hey y'all, Fred here. Thanks so much for joining me today. We are into cut testing. Today is another day for doing some cut testing, and we are going to cut test this Ontario Wrap Model 1.5 in MagnaCut. Very excited to have this one. I did a full review on it. You can find that here somewhere on my channel. The reason we're doing these is because, if you're just now tuning into the cut test series, so that we can get a baseline on a bunch of knives that we know are real, legitimate steel. We know what these are really made of, and we've done some testing on all these knives so that when we get around to testing these knives, which are coming up next, that we'll have a sense of, okay, well, you know, it's not really 𝗧𝗲𝗏𝗏VN. However, it held up as good or better than ARRPM 9 that we know is real, right? That's the kind of testing we're doing here. So we use my redneck rating scale in case you haven't seen this before. 1 is it cuts like a spoon, or all the way up to 10, which is sharper than my mother-in-law's insults. These are not specifically or particularly professional or objective tests. There's a lot of subjectivity in it, as you're going to find out. These are for my own personal interest to find out if the knives I've been buying and collecting are worth it or just a good showpiece. We're going to figure that out. If you would please, before we get too far down the road, hit that subscribe notification bell if you're not already. Give your boy a thumbs up if you think I did okay. Thumbs down if you want me to do something differently. Let me know what it is. Otherwise, I appreciate all you guys. Again, this is the Ontario Wrap Model 1.5. This is a relatively new knife. I haven't seen a whole lot of reviews out there on it. I got this at a fantastic price for $85 with a code at Atlantic Knife. So I bought it from a very legitimate knife dealer. This didn't come from Amazon or something like that. This is a real deal, legitimate MagnaCut, and I have done some homework on these and found other people who have tested these out and found the HRC, the lowest I've seen is 61.75, all the way up to 64 HRC, with most people saying these knives are coming in at 62 to 64 fairly regularly. That's shocking, y'all, for that kind of price, and that's why I had to pick this up, is because now I can add a real, genuine, well-done, professional MagnaCut blade into our cut testing. So I'm very excited to see how this is going to perform for us. This is a great, what I'm going to call a medium-sized knife. It's G10, nice grippy line, G10 over steel liners. There's no milling for particular weight reduction. This is a little over 7.5, about 7.63 inches in full length, about a 3-inch cutting length on this thing. Fairly slicey blades, only about 115 thousandths thick. It's a relatively high angle grind. One of the ways you can tell is by the height of that grind. It's not, you know, an end-all be-all to tell you it's a low or high angle. I'm going to say this is probably at least a 22 to 24 degree would be my guess. One of the ways you can tell is because when you grind a blade much thinner or at a lower angle, so this is an 18 degree, and you can see the bevel, the secondary bevel on here is a little bit taller on a blade like this. Now, there's a lot of factors. How tall is it? How thick does the material start to begin with? You know, flat grind, hollow grind, all that. Anyhow, I'm going to stay still. I think this is probably at least a 22-degree edge. It's kind of an interesting edge in as much as you can feel this thing feels like what I'm going to call a micro serrated edge. I'm going to see if I can get this into focus on the camera. You can almost see the serrations with the naked eye. Let me see if I can zoom in. I've learned this really cool trick. Let me see if I can get some good light on this edge. No, that just blurs it out. Maybe right about there. If you look around the angle, the bevel on this thing, you can see this tiny serrations, and you can feel it. When you run your fingernail across that blade, it feels like you're unzipping a zipper. It's like zzz, not smooth at all. So I think they've done that on purpose. This is a very purpose-built knife. This is one that you definitely want to keep and put into your survival kit, your bug-out bag, your emergency pack, whatever you have along that line. If I needed to trust my life to a knife and I can't carry all of my knives and I need to really be judicious in selecting the right one, this is the one you're going to choose. MagnaCut steel, of course, is going to handle very well. It's going to hold up really well in the elements, very rust resistant. Well-built blade. It's thin and slicey enough, but still thick enough to do some serious work. The tip all the way out, it stays fairly thick out to the tip, so you can, you know, feel good about pokey, stabby kind of stuff. And I think that's why they left the bevel at like about a 22 degree, give or take, is because it's not too tall and thin where it could easily chip or roll on you, although MagnaCut isn't prone to doing that particularly. And I think that's also why they've left this grind. I would say, like, I mean, this feels to me like a 200 grit. They basically put this on a 200 grit belt sander and, you know, sharpened both sides across that and left it that gritty. But I think they did that on purpose to make this a very durable, long-lasting edge that can handle cutting, you know, harder materials that you might find out in the wilderness. Of course, RAT stands for Randall's Adventure Training. And these guys have been around a very long time, and he makes knives specifically for that adventure, outdoors, survival kind of stuff. Everything from the way the grip and the general shape and design of the knife to the blade style and shape and thickness, just everything about this knife is built for heavy-duty wear and abuse and hard use. So great little knife for all of those reasons. It does ride on washers, does not ride on bearings. However, after a while, this was very stiff when I first got it. You'll see it's easy enough to flip out. You don't even need to put any wrist into it. But you will have to flip it a couple hundred times for it to get to that status. But again, with washers, there's no bearings to get gunked up. And so you can, you know, just kind of rinse it out if it gets dropped in the mud or the muck and keep on trucking with this thing. Easy access, very good access to the lock bar. Again, you can go see the full review. It's a little sharp on that lock bar, but we're going to find out. Ergonomically, it's a very well done knife. As I said, there's not a forward finger choil, but you can see this big flat spot right there. You can definitely put your finger in. When I'm cutting the cardboard, that's probably where I'm going to be cutting from right there. You will probably see that in just a minute. You can certainly choke back and it has very aggressive jimping. This jimping goes backwards towards your finger to really lock that thumb into place. You are not going to slip off of that very easily. And this big hook right here at the front, if you had to pokey stabby and let's say you got to get into a coconut to get yourself some coconut milk, that's what this knife is designed to do. Very solid lockup, feels solid in the hand. It's got this kind of common spoonish style of pocket clip. We're going to see how that feels. It actually is relatively flat to the knife. It doesn't feel bad when I'm squeezing this way. We'll see when we get to cutting wood. That's one thing that I wonder about. It's also relatively thin. So the handle on this thing is 0.43 inches thick. The weight is 4 ounces. I didn't mention that. So right there in the middle area, it's relatively blocky. However, the corners are knocked down. There's nothing sharp on it. But as with some of the other knives I've tested, after a while, if you're really hard push cutting, sometimes those edges of the handle can dig into your hand. But I'm going to say overall, this thing is perfectly built for the purpose for which it was designed. All right, so with that being said, let's do a little quick cut testing, you know, on the redneck scale, because we got to know where does it start out. There's no hang-ups anywhere on this blade, but you can see it's almost a little rough there as it gets towards the end. Let me zoom in on this. And the cut is very rough. This is what I'm talking about. There's no nicks or dings in the blade. This blade is basically unused. I haven't used it for cutting anything other than paper yet. But you can see how rough that cut is, and that's because of that low, like 200 grit, zippy kind of micro serrated edge that they've got on this thing. So I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10, which is a little deceptive because that would suggest it maybe is not as sharp as it could or should be. I think it is intentionally an 8 out of 10 on the old redneck scale for all the reasons that I've mentioned. So with that said, let's get over to the cutting table and get to cutting.
All right, so you can see here we've got 3 pieces of cardboard, total of 427 square inches. That's roughly about what we've used in the other test, maybe a few inches more, but pretty close. You can see it cuts very cleanly through this cardboard, no problems there. I did notice that this cardboard is much more heavy duty than most of the cardboard that I've been cutting. You can see if you hit it at a certain angle, it wants to really just tear more than just cut. I don't think that's the knife. I can definitely feel a difference in the cardboard itself. The knife, when you hit it at the right angles, slices through very quick and easy and cleanly. But the cardboard, for some reason, wants to tear. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but it really is different cardboard than what I'm used to cutting here. But overall, no issues, cutting through pretty cleanly. I'm just kind of showing you, hey, this cardboard feels very different from what I'm normally used to cutting here. But otherwise, it's going through great, no issues. Moving on to the third piece, just trying to go faster through this. I think you guys don't need to sit and watch some dude cutting cardboard. You can see there where it tore, and that's me pointing out just how heavy duty this board is compared to most pieces. But all in all, apart from those little tearing issues, which I don't really think are the blade, you're going to see it got a nick in the blade, but it didn't really do any major damage to it. We'll see that in the cut test here in just a minute. But all in all, went through there, no problem at all. So now I want to try some draw cuts. You can see easy enough to get to that tip, and it cuts nice and cleanly through the cardboard at that angle. Now I'm going to try some long cuts. You can see it's going right through. All those pieces are separating. So that indicates it's a nice sharp knife. I didn't really give a good cut there on that angle, but you can certainly do it, and that MagnaCut blade won't have any problems at all with that. All right, so let's grab a piece of paper here and see what kind of damage we did. This should be interesting. And what we can see immediately is that somewhere right in the middle of that blade, it ended up with a pretty decent sized nick in the blade that's just totally stopping it from cutting paper. I can feel it. The problem is it started out so serrated and rough to begin with, it's kind of almost hard to tell the difference between the roughness of the original edge and where it is. But you can see it'll stop midway every time. And now you get to watch some dude trying to figure out where exactly is, how bad is it? Really, is what I'm doing here is how bad is it? Is it just that spot in the middle, or is the front of the blade and the back of the blade damaged too? Are there any other points in it? What we came up with was basically we're at a 6 in sharpness. So let's move on to the hose and see how this thing does in terms of bite. I'm hoping that this micro serrated edge should really be able to bite into materials well, and that is kind of what I'm seeing. It's a weird thing. It's a very bitey edge, but it's not very sharp at the same time. So it bites well. It's not going to slide off, and certainly you can chop through those little pieces of rubber like this with pretty much ease. That's not going to stop it at all. I'm just trying to do a little bit more edge damage and see if, is this going to hurt it? How easy is it to chop rubber reinforced hose up? No problem there. I didn't do the paper test, but went straight into the rope test. Now I'm really looking to see, will this edge bite into this rope? That's what I'm hoping from the way that rough, gritty edge is. And it does bite into the rope, definitely is not sliding over it or across it. The problem is it's just not really sharp enough. So it's like a mixed bag. It bites, but it doesn't cut all that great. It's not terrible. Certainly we've had knives that have done a worse job on the rope, but I was really expecting more out of this MagnaCut. And I think all of this whole story of this cutting test will come down to the fact that the edge just really wasn't sharp with a fine grit to begin this whole thing. And I knew that, and we talked about it at the beginning of the video. So again, on the paper, I'm still seeing the same thing. There's one good sized nick in the middle of this blade. The first inch or so is sharp. And what I'm trying to determine, is it just that one piece in the middle, or is there more dings in the blade, so to speak? How about the tip? So I'm just trying to cut with different parts of the knife right now to see. I know there's a big hole, a big nick in the middle. Is there also damage to any other pieces of this blade, any other parts? So I apologize for all the terrible paper cutting, but that's where we're at. We basically just determined, okay, we're now at a 5. So it is losing some edge, certainly. Let's cut into some wood and see how it does. This is mainly an ergonomics test, but I also like to see how well the edge bites into the wood. I'm on one of the hard pieces of this wood right here. I've noticed that one of the sides is much harder than the others. I'm feeling this thumb grip. The jimping in the thumb definitely bites into your thumb when you're using it hard. So now I've switched to a hammer grip and a softer side of the wood. You can see it definitely bites in nice and deep and thick into that wood. But I do feel it, that squared off edge, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. I wondered if that would become an issue. It's not terrible, certainly not more than you might expect, but when you're really gripping it hard, you can feel the edge of those scales in there. Also feel the pocket clip just a little bit. So there you go on the ergonomics. And now before I start cutting, I'm realizing all the way back to the cardboard test, I ended up with some tape residue on the knife. And now that's got me wondering, okay, well, is that the reason why we couldn't cut very well through the paper with it? I don't think it is, but you know, there was definitely some residue there. I'm feeling it now. It doesn't feel all that sharp anymore. You can see we still have that exact same piece in the middle, although now it appears to be cutting a little bit better once you get past that nick in the blade. And that's why I keep cutting. Again, I'm just trying to determine, did I put any more nicks in the blade, in the tip or the heel of the blade, beyond the one I know that's in the middle that makes it look like it's doing a terrible job of cutting? And really, what the video doesn't show too well is that other than the middle section where that nick is, the heel and the tip of the blade didn't really get all that dull. So it's a weird kind of a mixed bag. I wasn't sure what to expect from this edge, the way it started to begin with, that micro serration. But we definitely put some damage on that blade to begin with. So let's go ahead and see if the strop can get us anywhere back into sharp at all. And as usual, when I know I have a little extra work to do, I tend to start stropping on the rough side, and I'll do 5 or 6 passes on that rough side on each side before I then begin to alternate sides on it. So I'm sticking with the rough side for a little bit while I alternate, really trying to do as good of a job as I can, really trying to hone it back. Now I switched over to the smooth side so we can see if that helps us at all. What I'm going to find out here is that when you have a grit that's that gritty, when you like stop sharpening your knife at a 200 grit, there's no amount of stropping that's going to bring it back. I still have that nick in the middle. You can see it's gotten a little bit better. The heel and the tip are a little bit better, but that big nick in the middle is just not going to come out. And I think, again, the reason is you just can't stop sharpening your knife at a 200 grit on there. It will certainly bite, and maybe it's great for outdoor adventure, cutting sticks and branches and thick rope and things like that. I'm sure it will do a fine job on that. But if you want a nice slicey blade, you just can't stop at a 200 grit. No amount of stropping is going to get that back to sharp. It will have to go on a sharpener in order to get it back. All right, so let's take a look at our final results. I apologize. I know it's probably going to be impossible to read this on your screen unless you're watching this on a computer, and a good-sized one at that. But I want to go through the test results here compared to some of the others. So we know this is the RAT 1.5 in MagnaCut, 62 to 64 HRC. That has a 5 rating on edge retention from Knife Steel Nerds. I did not sharpen the knife first. That became a huge factor. It started at an 8 on my sharpness scale. We cut about 427 inches of cardboard, and after that we ended up with that big nick in the middle of the blade. I had to knock the edge down to a score of a 6 at that point. I did the 3 hose cuts but didn't test it afterwards, so we went straight into the rope cuts. I did 11 rope cuts, and after that it was a little bit worse at a 5. Still, that major nick in the middle was really hampering it the most. So we cut into our wood, and it stayed at about a 5, give or take. You might even call it a 4 or a 5. But again, as I mentioned, what I really noticed there was one big nick in the middle, but the rest of the knife was so gritty already, that edge was so rough, that it was really hard to tell, did I really do damage to the sharpness, or am I just hitting the roughness of that edge? And unless you can get a full clean cut all the way through the knife, it's just not going to cut through paper well. Could not strop it back. I could have sat there and stropped it, 200 strokes per side. Still wouldn't have done it. When you have a grit, an edge that's that gritty, it's like putting it on a knife sharpener, reprofiling it with a 200 grit diamond stone, and then stopping and taking it off. It'll cut through materials, but it's not a very sharp apex. It's just not a very sharp blade. It's gritty. It would, be great for maybe cutting through some heavy-duty ropes and stuff. Certainly you could do more wood cutting and branches and trees and outdoorsy kind of adventure stuff. But as far as carrying this knife and using it for most tasks, it'll probably open an Amazon package, but that's not what you want out of the knife. So it was a bit of a gamble to begin with. I really debated, should I go ahead and finish putting a real edge on this knife or go with the edge it came with? I thought, I'm going to try it and see what we get. And it turns out that was not helpful at all. We got that big nick in the blade right after the cardboard. That stayed stuck throughout. It did seem to get a little worse after the rope and the wood. Ergonomically, the handle and the clip did feel a little bit rough in the hand after some good hard cutting, but not terrible, not more than you might, expect to be the case. Couldn't strop it back, again, because the edge was just too gritty. It's just not even possible. It was very bitey. I mean, it certainly did bite. I think what I need to do is really just reprofile, sharpen the blade again, and go at it with a fresh edge. I think it will do a lot better. Given that it's a good MagnaCut steel with a high HRC rating, you would certainly expect it to do much better. Still, probably good as is for hard outdoors kind of use, but I think putting a good edge on it would make a world of difference. So I give it an overall test rating of about a 6 or a 7 as is. I just can't rate it any higher. It took some abuse. It definitely got that big nick in the blade and made it almost impossible to cut paper right after the cardboard. So tough how to rank this one. I have to rate it as it worked today, and I think that was a mistake to leave that really gritty edge on it. Again, I think the solution here is just finish putting it on the sharpener and give it a nice, good, sharp edge. Don't need to go any more than a 600 grit, but you definitely got to go more than about a 200 grit. That would make a big difference. So overall, a 6 or a 7, somewhere in that range. It compares okay. It certainly did better than some of the other knives, but this one's almost kind of a wash. It's really impossible to say this is how a good MagnaCut blade should be because of that edge. So it is what it is. I'm going to definitely sharpen it up. We'll probably do another test with it at some point in time. I still like the knife. Definitely happy to have it. Definitely putting it in my go bag, my emergency kit. That's the right place for this knife. Hopefully that's been somewhat insightful for you guys. There you go. The lesson here is if you don't stop sharpening your knife at a 200 or 300 grit. You got to keep going to at least 600, and I think that'll make all the difference in the world. Otherwise, thanks so much for your time. If you would, again, as always, hit that like and subscribe and notification bell. That all helps me so much. I'd love to hear y'all's comments. Anything you think I missed or would like to do better or differently in these videos, just let me know. Otherwise, thanks so much. We'll talk to you on the next one. Take care.